Hi, everyone. We're going to be looking at Elizabeth Warren's remarks at the National Press Club. I always think it's nice to know when this was given and perhaps who the audience is. So this was given August 21st, 2018, so a couple years ago. And what do we know about Elizabeth Warren? Well, she was a Democratic candidate, so we know that she's a Democrat. We know that she probably has liberal ideas. And because she's she's making remarks at the National Press Club in Washington, she's probably speaking to people like-minded. So people who are also either Democrats or their political views are more liberal leaning. So when you look at the rhetorical triangle, consider the speaker, and that is someone who is maybe Democrat, liberal. Think about who the audience is. And so for now, we maybe think that the speaker and the audience share some like ideals. So maybe she's not so much trying to persuade them, but really get them riled up. And that's where we get into the pathos. And so we need to look at now, what is her message? This video is going to be purely looking at logos or the logic in which she crafts her argument. So looking at how she appeals to the audience's, how she appeals to her messages, facts, statistics, how well researched this is. So let's begin. I want to begin with two numbers, 73 and 18. So that's an effective hook, right? It kind of makes me think, well, what do those numbers have to do? What are they? It sparks some curiosity, at least on this reader's note. For more than half a century, the National Election Survey has been asking Americans a simple question. Here's the question. Do you trust the federal government to do the right thing all the time, or at least most of the time? So she's setting up this idea of trust in the government, or doing the right thing all the time or most of the time. And referring to this outside party, the National Election Survey, she's starting to get she's starting to begin and show her research by another source. And so is this source credible? You can see on my annotations, I've linked their website. You can tell for yourself as an audience member, are they credible or not? For me, this audience member says, yes, they are. In 1958, so that's a date, right? You can go in the history books and check that date. In 1958, the first year this survey was conducted, that number was 73. That is, 73% of Americans polled said yes, they trusted their government to do the right thing at least most of the time. And for a long time, that number remained high. 1968, that's another date, was a year of historic convulsions. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was killed. North Korea captured a U.S. surveillance ship. And North Vietnam launched the Tet Offensive. So right here she lists, this is a list of historical facts, right? Kind of seeing that maybe in 1968, America was maybe pulled socially and culturally, and maybe they were experiencing different and various traumas, right? Historic convulsions is the language Warren uses. So MLK was assassinated. Kennedy was killed. We have North Korea that captured a U.S. surveillance ship. North Vietnam launching the Tet Offensive. And so she really comes with this claim, faith in the government went down. But overall, it held firm. 62% trusted the government. And after Watergate, this number took a big hit, dropping to 36%. So her reference of Watergate, you can see that little 2 shows you that down here. You can look at that footnote, Watergate. I've also linked to the Wikipedia page. But Watergate is when President Nixon had his people on his political party go and collect tapes at the Watergate Hotel to try to get him reelected. And so because this was a giant United States scandal that resulted in both his impeachment and his resignation, we can see that, whoa, that maybe had Americans begin to distrust their leaders. So maybe this was the spark of that initial distrust. And she continues, but today, 18. So right here, that comparison of 72 or 73, to 18 is referencing the hook. And it's by comparing these two numbers and showing a series of maybe what has happened, Warren is stringing the audience to believe or see, wow, that's a large drop in just, 50, 60 years that Americans have now largely distrusted their government. She's setting this comparison up as a problem, right? An issue that needs a solution. And then Warren even paraphrases, not even 1 in 5 Americans today trust their government to do the right thing. That's in reference to that number 18%, and she's made that simply into a statistic that's easier for her audience to understand. She continues, let's see, and she ends up using, I'll jump ahead. The way I see it, a loss of faith this broad, and she's referring to, the distrust in the United States government. And this profound is more than a problem. She's identifying the problem. It is a crisis. And by substituting the word problem, the diction problem with crisis, that's actually a call to pathos. It's a call to see, whoa, wake up, people. We've got a major problem, and it's more than a problem. It's a crisis. You should feel bad. You should feel fear. You should feel angry about this. So she's really targeting the emotion of her audience. And she ends with a crisis of faith. This is the crisis. Look how many times she's used crisis in these 2 sentences. 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7, right? So that repetition of crisis is really echoing to her audience members. This is major. Act with anger. There's fear. She's really trying to embed some of that pathos. And she asks a question, a rhetorical question. Why have so many people lost faith? Thoughtful people give different answers. Warren never tells us who these thoughtful people are. And so initially it sets up and it reads like she's giving expert testimony, but she never tells us who these experts are. So it reads like logos, but it's actually fallacious. There's actually no specific person that she gives. Perhaps if in an interview question you could ask her and she might have some answers to back it up, but in this particular speech, she does not. Page 1 ends with, some say it's the result of politicians making government the enemy, and that's true. So she ends with a claim of truth, even though we don't see yet how that is true. Stay tuned for video 2.